They told her to take her hands off the casket at 10:17 in the morning in front of the 41 people who had come to bury her son. The funeral director did not say it cruelly. He said it the way a man reads a meter. He said the balance of 485,000 naira had not been settled, that the deposit she had paid covered storage and nothing more, and that until the full amount was received, the casket could not leave the chapel, and the grave that had been dug that morning at the cemetery off Ikorodu Road would have to be filled back in. The room went quiet. A woman near the front began to cry, then stopped, because crying felt like the wrong sound for what was happening. The mother stood with both her palms flat on the lid of the box that held her only child, and she did not let go. And in the very back row, in the last seat against the wall, a man in a plain dark suit who nobody in that chapel had ever seen before set down the order of service he had been holding, and slowly, without a word, he stood up. Her name was Nkechi Okoro, and she was 54 years old. She had sold second-hand clothes at Tejuosho Market in Yaba for 31 years, the Okrika bales that came packed tight from overseas, and she had a particular skill that the other traders did not have. She could put her hand into an unopened bale, feel the cloth without seeing it, and tell you which pieces would sell and which would sit. Her hands had not stopped working since she was a girl. They were a record of that work, the knuckles thick, the right thumb permanently bent from 40 years of pulling thread and folding cloth. And when she pressed those hands against her son's casket, they looked like they had never once in their life been allowed to rest. She carried one thing in the small black bag on her shoulder that was not money and not a phone. It was a school exercise book, the cheap kind with 60 pages and a faded blue cover. And on the inside front cover, in her son's careful handwriting, was a column of figures. Tobena had been saving for her eyes. She had a cataract growing thick over the left one, and the doctor at the eye clinic in Mushin had said the surgery would cost 150,000 naira. And Tobena, who was a bus conductor on the mile, 1-2 to a Shodi route, and made what a bus conductor makes, had been putting away whatever he could, 200 here, 500 there, and writing each amount down in that book so he would not be tempted to spend it. The last entry was 38,500 naira. He had been 24 years old. He had been 19 days dead. He had died on a Tuesday night when a tanker lost its brakes on Ikorodu Road and came across the median into the Danfo he was hanging off the side of, calling for passengers the way he always did. And Nkechi did not have the 485,000 naira that the funeral home wanted, and she had no husband to ask. Because Tobena's father had walked out when the boy was 4, and she had no other children, because Tobena was the only one God had given her and then taken back. What she had was 9,400 naira, folded in a knot in the corner of her wrapper, and a son in a box she was not allowed to bury. Here is the thing about Nkechi that the funeral home never understood. She did not beg. From the first day she had walked into that place, she had explained, calmly, the way you explain a thing you believe a reasonable person will fix. She explained that she sold clothes. She explained that the market had been slow since the rains. She explained that she would pay every kobo, that she only needed a little time, that her son had been a good boy who took care of her, and that he deserved a proper grave. She did not cry while she explained. She had folded her best wrapper that morning, the green one with the gold edge that she wore to church, and she had ironed it the night before with a coal iron because the light had been off, pressing it slowly, carefully, the way her own mother had taught her, as though the cloth were something precious. Her son would be buried by a mother who had not surrendered. That was the one thing left that she could give him. There was a memory she carried that she had never been able to explain. Years before, when Tobena was perhaps 18, he had come home one night past midnight with his shirt torn at the shoulder and dried blood on the front of it that was not his own. She had been frightened, and she had asked him what happened, and he had only said, "I helped somebody, Mama. Don't worry, it's nothing." And he would not say more, not that night, and not ever, and after a while she had stopped asking because Tobena was a quiet boy who did quiet things and did not like to be praised for them. Folded into the back of that blue exercise book, behind the last page, there was a small laminated card from a hospital on Lagos Island, a blood donor card with his name on it, dated 6 years earlier. She had found it after he died, and it had confused her, because as far as she knew, her son had been terrified of needles his whole life, and had never in his days given blood to anyone. She had not understood it. She had put it back in the book, and she had not thought about it again, because a grieving mother does not have room in her head for a small, confusing card. The funeral home was called Everlasting Rest, and the man at the front desk was named Obinna Eze, and his name tag behind glass on the counter said, Obinna Eze, accounts. He was not a wicked man. He was a man with a ledger and a manager, and a rule that said nobody leaves before the balance clears. And he had watched too many families promise to come back with money and never come back. And so somewhere along the years, he had stopped looking at the faces and started looking only at the numbers. The storage was 4,000 naira a day. The chapel was 40,000. The casket Nkechi had chosen, the cheapest one, the plain one, was 90,000. The grave and the digging and the certificate and the carrying made up the rest. Obinna had explained it all to her 3 times, patiently the way you explain arithmetic to someone you have decided cannot do arithmetic, and each time he had ended with the same sentence, Madam, it is not me, it is the policy. There were others in that office over the 19 days, and not one of them moved. There was a security guard at the gate who looked at his phone when she walked past. There were 2 other families settling their own bills who lowered their eyes. Because a poor woman's trouble is contagious and nobody wants to catch it on the morning they are burying their own. There was a junior staff girl who once quietly slid a paper cup of water across the counter to Nkechi and then looked away, frightened of having been kind. The whole machine of that place was built so that no single person ever had to be the one who said no. The policy said no. The policy had no face, and so no face had to feel anything. In the 19 days, Nkechi tried everything a woman can try. She went to her landlord and asked for time on the rent so she could put that money toward the burial, and he gave her 1 week and a warning. She went to the woman who ran the larger stall beside hers in the market and borrowed 40,000 naira at an interest she did not let herself think about. She sold her sewing machine, the foot pedal butterfly she had owned for 26 years, the one she had carried from her village, and got 22,000 for a machine worth 4 times that, because a desperate seller has no price. She went to her church, and the pastor took up a collection after the second service, and they raised 31,500, and she wept then, not from grief, but from the other thing, the thing that lives next door to grief, which is gratitude. And still, when she added every naira of it together, when she counted it on her bed at night under a single bulb, laying the notes out in their stacks the way she laid out cloth, she was 210,000 naira short. She had been counting the same money for 19 nights, and it had not grown. The funeral home gave her a date. The director, a man above Obinna, came out one afternoon and told her that the chapel was booked, that they could not hold the body indefinitely, that the service would be Friday morning at 10, and that the full balance had to be in hand by the time the service ended, or the burial would not proceed and the body would be moved to the general store at the back, where unclaimed remains were kept. He did not say what happened to remains in the general store. He did not have to. The heat in that corridor was the kind that does not move, that sits on the skin and in the lungs, and it carried the smell of the place, formalin and floor bleach and old flowers, a smell that got into Nkechi's green wrapper and would not wash out for weeks. She walked out through the gate into the white afternoon sun, and she stood on the road for a moment with her hand against the wall, and across from her, at a small table under a faded umbrella, an old woman selling akara and pap looked up and watched her, and something in the old woman's face was not the same as everyone else's face. The old woman's name was Mama Pauline, and she had sold food outside the gate of Everlasting Rest for 31 years, which was longer than Obinna had worked there and longer than the director had owned it. She had seen every kind of grief walk in and out of that gate, and she had learned to tell the difference between people the way some people can tell the difference between cloth. She called Nkechi over. She put a plate of akara in front of her and a cup of pap, and would not take money for it, and she said, "Eat, my sister. You cannot carry your son if you fall down." And while Nkechi ate, Mama Pauline talked, the way old women talk, in a low, steady current, and somewhere in the current she said a thing that Nkechi was too tired to hold on to in that moment, but that she would remember later. She said, "Your boy, Tibena, the conductor. I knew him. He used to buy akara from me every morning, 200 naira, and he would always drop 1 extra 100 on the table for the small boy who begs at this gate. Every morning, he thought nobody saw him do it." Nkechi had not known that, She had not known 100 things about her son's small daily kindnesses, because the people who do quiet things do not come home and report them. If you have ever buried someone you loved with money you did not have, if you know what that particular floor feels like under your feet, then stay with me and subscribe. Because what Mama Pauline said next is the thing that turns this whole story over. Mama Pauline leaned in, and she lowered her voice and she said, "There is a man who has been coming here. A big man. Fine motor, a driver in front. He came 2 times in the last month. Before your son's accident, asking, did anybody know a conductor on the mile 1-2 line? A young man named Tobena, tall, quiet, with a small scar over his right eye. Asking had anybody seen him in years. I told him I knew the boy. He left a card and a phone number with me, and he said if I ever saw the boy I should call. He said it like it was the most important thing in his life." She reached into the folds of her own wrapper and brought out a small white business card, soft now from being carried, and she put it on the table next to the empty plate. Nkechi looked at it. The name on it meant nothing to her. It said Chief Dubem Anazi, and under the name it said a company she had never heard of, and a Bordelon Road, Ikoyi address, and a phone number. She did not understand why a man on Bordelon Road would spend a single minute of his life looking for her son. She put the card in the back of the blue exercise book, next to the donor card she also did not understand, and she did not call the number, because what would she say? Your boy is dead. We are burying him on Friday if I can find the money. She could not find the money. Friday came. The Chapel of Everlasting Rest held the casket on a low table at the front, and the 41 people who loved Tobena or loved his mother sat on the white plastic chairs, and the service was small, and the pastor was kind. And at the end of it, the director stood and said the words about the balance and asked Nkechi to step aside, and the room went quiet. And Nkechi put her 2 bent hands flat on the lid of the box and did not move them. And in the very back, against the wall, in the last seat, a man in a plain dark suit set down his order of service and stood up. He did not raise his voice. He walked up the center aisle, between the white chairs, and the room turned to watch him, because there is a kind of stillness that a certain kind of man carries that makes a room go quiet without his asking. He stopped beside the casket, and he looked at the photograph that had been placed on top of it, a photograph of a smiling young man in a conductor's jersey, and he looked at it for a long time. He had a scar of his own, a faint one, and he had gray at his temples, and his shoes were very good and made no sound. He turned to the director, and he said 5 words. What is the full balance? The director told him, 485,000 naira, less what had been paid. The man took a phone from his jacket and he made one short call, and he gave an account name, and he said, "Send it now. All of it, and the cost of a proper headstone marble." And he put the phone away. Then he turned to Nkechi, and for the first time his voice changed, the way a wall changes when you find the one door in it. He said, "Madam, my name is Dubem Anozi. 6 years ago my daughter Adora was knocked down by an Okada on Awolowo Road and left in the gutter, and 17 people walked past her. One person stopped. A boy. He carried her on his back to the general hospital, and when they said she needed blood and the bank was empty, he rolled up his sleeve and gave his own, even though..." And here, the big man's voice caught, and he pressed it down, even though the nurse told me afterward that the boy was so afraid of the needle that he was shaking the whole time. He would not give his full name. He would not take 1 naira. He said only that his name was Tobena, and that he conducted the mile 1-2 bus, and then he disappeared before I came back to the ward. And I have been looking for him for 6 years to say thank you and to pay a debt that cannot be paid. He looked at the photograph again. My daughter is alive. She is a doctor now. She is sitting in the 2nd row, and I did not find your son in time to shake his hand, so I will not be late for this. Nkechi's hands came off the casket. She reached into the blue exercise book, and she took out the laminated donor card, the one that had confused her for 6 years, the one that proved her terrified son had once given his blood to a stranger, and she held it up so that the big man could see it, and she could not speak, and she did not need to. What Chief Anozi did after that day was not a single grand gesture, because grand gestures fade. He paid for Tobena's burial, and the marble headstone, and the funeral feast that fed the 41 people and Mama Pauline besides. But then he did the thing that lasts. He sat down with the owner of Everlasting Rest, And within a month, the funeral home had a new written rule posted at the front counter where Obinna Eze sat. A rule that said no family that has lost a child would ever again be turned away at the chapel for an unpaid balance, that a fund would carry the cost until the family could pay, and if they never could, the fund would carry it forever. He named the fund the Tobena Okoro Fund, and the first plaque went up on the wall of the very chapel where the box had nearly been carried to the general store. And Obinna Eze, who was not a wicked man, read that plaque every morning when he opened the counter. And a man who reads a thing like that every morning slowly becomes a different man. The cataract surgery that Tobena had been saving for, 200 naira at a time, was done at a private clinic on Lagos Island within the week, and Adora Anozi, the doctor whose life Nkechi's son had carried on his back, was the one who held the older woman's hand while the bandages came off and the light came back into her left eye. Tobena Okoro had never told his mother what he did on Awolowo Road. He came home with blood on his shirt, and he said it was nothing and he never spoke of it again. And then he went on living his small, good life, dropping an extra 100 naira on a food seller's table for a begging boy, saving 200 at a time in a blue exercise book for his mother's eyes, hanging off the side of a danfo and calling for passengers until a tanker with no brakes ended it on a Tuesday night. He thought nobody saw the things he did. He was wrong about that. The world saw. The world keeps a longer ledger than the one Obinna Eze kept at his counter, and on that ledger, nothing a person does in the dark is ever truly lost. This is the thing they will not tell you, the thing that the policy with no face will never admit. The good you do quietly does not vanish, because nobody clapped for it. It goes out into the world, and it travels sometimes for 6 years, sometimes longer, through people you will never see again. And one day, on the worst morning of someone's life, it comes walking back up the center aisle in a plain dark suit, and it stands up. You cannot always pay your debts to the people who are owed, but you can refuse to be late for the next one. And a kindness given to a stranger in a gutter is never the end of the story. It is a seed put into the ground in the dark, and seeds do not disappear. They wait, and then they rise. The morning Nkechi Okoro walked into that funeral home, with 9,400 naira knotted in the corner of her wrapper, she believed she was completely alone in the world, that her son had left her nothing but a box she could not bury and a book of unfinished sums. She was wrong about that, the same way her son had been wrong about who was watching. He had left her, the one thing that no policy, no ledger, no balance due could ever take. He had left her the proof of who he had been, written not in his handwriting, but in the body of a living woman in the second row, and in a debt a powerful man had carried across 6 years like a stone in his chest, waiting for the chance to set it down. So let me ask you something, and I want you to truly answer it, not for me, for yourself. If you found out today that someone you loved and lost had once in secret saved a stranger's life and asked for nothing and never told a soul, not even you, would it change how you remember them? And here is the harder half of the question. How many people are walking past someone in the gutter right now, this very afternoon, telling themselves it is not their business? And which one are you going to be the next time it is your turn to be the one who stops? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. And subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world steps over until the day their quiet good comes walking back to stand up for them. I'll see you in the next one.